It was President Eisenhower who said that the future lies ahead. Indeed it does.
Senator Lee Metcalf was a U.S. House of Representative member from the state of Montana. He served from 1953 to 1960, and then he ran for the Senate and served from 1961 to his death in January 1978. The project I am working on is a 2-year privately funded grant from the Council on Libraries and Information Resources. It's called a Hidden Collections Grant, and what they do is they supply funding for archival materials and museums to process collections that have been inaccessible. We have over 4,000 images of Senator Lee Metcalf, over 2,900 prints, over 1,000 negatives, and we also have over 320 film reels that are from his Senate office. They were his working photos, his working films, political ads, campaign ads that he filmed himself in the Senate recording studio. So until we got the photographs in 2008, most of the photographs and the negatives, we didn't have any visual documentation of the senator's life. We didn't understand where he went, who he was with, what he did. And so now part of this project is to take this collection in his history and make it go from hidden to people being able to use it and understand who he was.
I'm delighted to have as my guest today one of the most interesting men in Washington, Mr. Ralph Nader. Mr. Nader, I'm delighted to have you on the behalf of the people of Montana before this television audience. And how did you get into this business of conducting this crusade about automobile safety?
This is a film of Ralph Nader being interviewed about his campaign on car safety and also trying to get seatbelts in automobiles with Senator Lee Metcalf. Every few weeks, Senator Metcalf did a piece entitled Washington Reports, or Reports from Washington, and he would send them copies of the film reels out to his constituents in Montana, because at the time Montana did not have a state newspaper representative in DC. So there was very few opportunities for people to learn what was going on in DC. And this was one way that Metcalf could introduce people to national politicians, federal congressmen, legislators, members of the president's cabinet. A lot of our film reels are of these type of reports in the Senate recording studio, and Metcalf had photographs taken with everybody. So what we're looking at here are Senator Lee Metcalf and Mike Mansfield's weekly newsletters. They called them A Montanan's Washington Notebook, or AMWN for short. This started in 1955. Senator James E. Murray of Montana started these as a way to correspond with constituents back home. They took it upon themselves as a congressional delegation, the Republican and Democrat representatives from Montana, to share news in one short 2 to 4 page, really political zine, if you want, including photographs. And what we're looking at here is a photograph of Lee Metcalf around August 1961, and he is with a number of national conservation leaders. These are the men who helped to revise the wilderness bill that would eventually be passed in 1964 as the Wilderness Act. Lee Metcalf started working on the Wilderness Act actually in the 1950s. The Forest Service at that time was working with logging companies to allow overlogging of certain areas that were technically not under protection. And because of that, huge issues of deforestation, wildlife habitat desecration were going on. Metcalf had been working since the late 50s with leaders such as Howard Zonnheiser, the executive secretary of the Wilderness Society, to develop a wilderness bill. Howard Zonnheiser wrote the core of what became the Wilderness Act of 1964, but Metcalf started pushing it through. It took about 10 years of his campaigning and pushing for different bills to stop logging. The Save Our Streams bill that he tried pushing in 1962 was his bill. He wrote it, he proposed it, he sponsored it. And unfortunately, it didn't pass then, but it did bring up attention to the issues going on with the desecration and destruction of natural habitats in the United States. This photo that we're looking at is from August 1960, and this is a photo of all the players in the Senate and the House together. This is 2.5, 3 months before the election where JFK was elected as president. So they're all huddling together, and we were able to identify this photograph thanks to a description and the publication of this image in one of the A Montanans Washington Notebook issues. We are looking at a color photo of a candid snapshot of Senator Lee Metcalf introducing Senator John F. Kennedy at the Billings, Montana airport on September 23rd, 1960. This was during his Senator Kennedy's campaign tour, and he and Metcalf had become close friends. So this is one of the rare moments that we see a non-scripted image depicting the two having a little laugh together at the introduction ceremony. This photograph is of Hubert Humphrey and Lee Metcalf in about 1966. We don't know the event. Obviously, you see the seal of the president here. By this time, Humphrey had become the vice president of the United States under President Lyndon B. Johnson. And Metcalf and him had met around 1955, had become close allies. They both shared a liberal democratic platform, and Humphrey campaigned for Senator Metcalf in 1966 when Metcalf was seeking re-election to the Senate.
Now, having seen all of this, I feel confident that the people of Montana will return Lee Metcalf to the United States Senate this November.
This is one of my favorite photographs. You see Senator Metcalf at this point in time, the late 1950s. He is Representative Metcalf, wearing a Native American headdress. I believe that this is at the Flathead Indian Reservation. The Native Americans in the state of Montana loved Lee Metcalf because he sought their best for them and did not seek to patronize them. He fought against immediate termination, which was the dominant policy in the 1940s and 1950s in the U.S. Congress, to terminate the Native Americans' relationships with the federal government. And he was much beloved by many Native Americans. This headdress he actually had framed in his Senate office the entire tenure of his time in the U.S. Senate, and he liked to have people photographed with him standing in front of it. He was a quiet man, some would say. He didn't like the spotlight. He was a New Deal politician. He believed in helping people and not seeking a lot of praise for himself. The thing I learned about Senator Metcalf through this project was how influential he was behind the scenes. He had been pushed to be a Supreme Court justice by President Johnson in the 60s, but he declined. He had been noted as a candidate for president in 1968, and he declined, which led to Bobby Kennedy choosing to run after he declined. A lot of stuff that he chose not to do that influenced the way that this country has been shaped since the 60s, and the things that he did do, the legislation he supported, that's been a surprise. So I'm hoping from this project that people will get to see the same senator that I do, a great man who did a lot of work for this state, even when people maybe didn't realize what he was doing for them.